Oh boy. Did the disastrous launch of Cyberpunk 2077 teach us nothing? Have developers really not learned from these mistakes? Hello everyone, I am TheNamesJER, and today I wanted to talk about this new Grand Theft Auto, The Trilogy, The Definitive Edition. Woo, that is a mouthful. It's no secret that I am a huge fan of both Rockstar games and more specifically, the Grand Theft Auto series. I mean, replaying GTA 4 last year is what prompted me to start doing YouTube videos again. So, needless to say, I was pretty excited when I heard we were getting remasters of 3 of the best games in the entire series. With GTA 3 maybe being my favorite game of all time, okay, maybe tied with Bully, there was no shortage of hype from me, which is why it was so shocking when this trio of Rockstar classics finally launched. Alright guys, so I feel like I need to add a bit of a disclaimer here before I start the video. Because I'm so damn slow at making my videos, during my editing process, Rockstar released yet another update for this game. While there's no excuse for how this trilogy launched, it does seem like they are proactively attempting to make things right with it, and I must give them credit where it is due. Since these updates will lead to some inconsistencies with the information in the video, I'm going to throw notes in throughout to make sure everyone is aware of any changes. But I didn't want to just scrap the video and redo it because these are still my genuine thoughts about the game at launch. So with all of that out of the way, let's get into the video.
Oh shit, here we go again.
You would think by now the gaming industry would have learned from the mistakes of the spectacularly failed and undercooked experiences given to players over the last few years. Nowadays it feels like every holiday season isn't complete without a rushed out, half-baked title to disappoint everyone. In 2018, it was the completely broken mess of Fallout 76. 2019 gave us the incredibly lazy Pokemon Sword and Shield. 2020 saw the release of the underwhelming and overpromised Cyberpunk 2077. And now, in 2021, Rockstar have joined the list of culprits with their remaster of the original 3D Grand Theft Auto trilogy. With how much of a disaster CD Projekt Red's Cyberpunk release was, leaders throughout the giant gaming companies should really be grasping the concept better. Yet the industry still continues to make the same mistakes time and time again. I mean, it's almost effortless to draw parallels between Cyberpunk 2077 and this new GTA Trilogy remaster. Both showed very little actual representative gameplay, if any at all. They both had over-exaggerated marketing, and the way both handled review copies is just downright duplicitous. On top of that, Rockstar's parent company, Take-Two, was not only issuing DMCA takedowns to fan-made mods of the original PC versions, but went as far as to completely remove the older versions from all digital storefronts to make room for the new definitive editions. This was objectively a shady and completely anti-consumer move, and it gave the impression that they wanted to thwart any competition that could be given to the remasters. Rockstar decided on a global release date for the trilogy, setting the launch at 10 AM Eastern Standard Time on November 11th worldwide. But as you can probably guess, this didn't go as planned either. To start, the wrong date was mistakenly set for the PlayStation version, and so players on Sony's consoles got to experience the game a whole day earlier than everyone else. And while Xbox and Nintendo Switch users got to pre-download and play right at 10 AM on release day, players on PC were forced to use Rockstar's dedicated launcher, which of course lacks a preload feature. What was even worse for the PC players was that the Rockstar launcher went down for maintenance shortly after launch, and so players on the platform could no longer download or play the game they just paid for. A day later, the launcher finally came back online, but the trilogy was still unable to be accessed as Rockstar had removed the game completely from the service and implemented an unnecessary DRM check to bar anyone who already had it installed from playing it. It turns out that what is likely the cause of all of this is the accidental inclusion of unlicensed songs and even the infamous Hot Coffee minigame in San Andreas. But worst of all for Rockstar, the game had a bunch of behind-the-scenes notes and uncompiled scripting codes left in the game's data files. It truly is unprecedented to see such a glaring mistake overlooked and shipped out with the final product, especially by a company as big as Rockstar and their parent company, Take-Two. Thankfully, by day 3 of the fiasco, the game was back online and those who paid for it and downloaded it could finally get to experience it. I'm sure it seems a little bit extra for me to bring up all of this, but it perfectly demonstrates what the overall theme of this game's existence is. A rushed and unfinished product full of careless mistakes and shortcomings. So if you thought this was the end of Rockstar's migraine with the situation, well, we're only just getting started.
I know, you're just overwhelmed with emotion.
Once I finally got my hands on the game, it was in a pretty rough state. Like I said earlier, the comparisons between GTA, the Trilogy, the Definitive Edition, and Cyberpunk 2077 are far too easy to make. Much like the doomed launch of 2077, the 3 games included in this package are littered with an unbelievable amount of bugs, glitches, and inconsistencies. This really shouldn't have been surprising though, as the studio who worked on the release, Grove Street Games, formerly Wardrum, also made the infamous Xbox 360, PS3, and mobile ports of San Andreas that are notoriously some of the worst ports around. YouTubers Vadim and Badger Goodger have an excellent 2-part series on just what makes these ports so bad, and it's worth checking out if you're morbidly curious. As far as the newest revisit to the trilogy goes, visually speaking they do look pretty nice and have some substantial upgrades to the gameplay, having made the switch from the renderware engine to Unreal Engine 4. But that's only a half-truth, as this move also introduces a ton of changes that completely lose the artistic vision of the originals, as well as adding various bugs and glitches that weren't present in the PlayStation 2 releases. So what is it about these remasters that has everyone so divided, and more importantly, why do these versions of 3 classic games not live up to the Definitive Edition label they've been given?
This is a disaster. We are so screwed, man.
The first thing you'll notice when starting any one of the 3 games included in this trilogy is the lighting and shadows. In the opening cutscene for GTA 3, you can see the headlights from the Banshee casting dynamic shadows off of the armored vehicles outside of the bank, and quite frankly, it looks really cool. The light-up hotel signs in beachfront Vice City cast vibrant neon light onto vehicles and characters as they pass underneath, and something small like dome lamps projecting shadows out of open car doors are really nice touches, even if they are a bit overstated. But so much of the original tone and atmosphere of these games is lost with these new visual systems. The original San Andreas had some amazing ambiance, with its fictional take on Los Angeles, known as Los Santos, having an amazing heat wave and orange haze effect. But subtleties like this become lost in the translation to a new effects system. This lack of haze, fog, and other elements really take away from the sense of scale felt in the PS2 versions and make the worlds feel so much smaller in comparison. There are more oddities that come about with this change as well. In the originals, tail lamps and reverse lights had a soft glow and a simple decal indicating they were on. But with the shift to Unreal, lamps on the rear of vehicles are now only illuminated when braking. So they'll go through the effort to add dome lamps, but can't include reverse lights on vehicles? And really, it's these type of inconsistencies that completely sum up everything wrong with these remasters. It's not all Grove Street Games' fault though, as some of it comes with the territory of moving to Unreal, but it lacks that careful attention to detail. For some reason, characters and smaller objects have this very jarring use of ambient occlusion where everything looks like it has a black glow around it, not to mention how dark shadows can be, making some cutscenes completely indiscernible. The new global water effect provided by Unreal does, however, look really nice, but it also means that they all lose a huge chunk of their original personality, as each game no longer has unique water for the city it belonged to. The more realistic water just feels so out of place with the more stylized and cartoony art design of other environmental objects, in addition to the fact that small fountains, puddles, and pools straight up look bizarre using the exact same water asset as the oceans. Scattered throughout the world, and most notably in the countryside of San Andreas, are some beautifully made bushes, trees, grass, and other foliage that really bring life and add depth to these locations, and represent just how impactful a remaster can be. I also have to say, the decision to retain the exaggerated and cartoony art style of the original games is something I will greatly commend Grove Street Games for. This is most apparent when looking at the updated character models, but once again is full of so many inconsistencies that the original vision gets lost along the way. Characters like Sweet, Big Smoke, and Crash all retain their iconic looks while improving the polygons and textures to bring them into the high-definition age. But then you look at Tommy Vercetti, Lance Vance, and Ken Rosenberg from Vice City, and they all just seem to lose the personality they once had. I truly believe that this isn't because of the new models used for the characters, but rather the lack of depth and detail in the textures used on these models. To show you what I mean, I've taken our friend Ken Rosenberg here into Photoshop and added in some details based off his old texture, and yeah, I'd say it speaks for itself. You can see that just adding some lines for wrinkles, adding stubble, and fixing the hair collar and eyebrows makes Ken look way more how he's supposed to. But even though most of the characters received substantial updates, CJ seems to have been given the short end of the stick. While some of his apparel has seen full overhauls like this button-up shirt or his starting shoes, other textures like his default jeans or these camo cargo pants remain unchanged and stick out like a sore thumb in cutscenes compared to the high-res textures on other characters. Claude is one that I'm really torn about. His new character model just doesn't sit right with me. For some reason they based this remastered Claude off of the original bulbous PS2 model, when really they should have looked to the much better design in the Xbox version as their reference. In fact, as I started to play more of GTA 3, I noticed that none of the assets are based off their improved versions from the Xbox release. Look at vehicles like the Kuruma or Sentinel, and you'll notice they don't have the tail lamp bezels present in the Xbox version, or how the starting safe house in Portland is missing the extra geometry and detail from that release. It's clear a lot of the trilogy's texture work was ran through an AI upscaler, resulting in the occurrence of a plethora of issues. Did nobody check this stuff before packaging it up as a final product, or did upper management just brush it off and ship it anyway? There's so many misspellings and typos with all of the in-game ads, billboards, and signs. Everyone has probably already seen this hot dog sign, but it is a prime example. The last word of the slogan is supposed to be meat, but the AI upscaler interpreted as heat, completely ruining the joke. It appears that with all of these in-game signs, the AI interpreted and replaced the text with the most boring and generic fonts imaginable, instead of just enhancing the original textures. Going back to the Shaft hot dog sign, you can see that the PS2 texture has a unique typeface just for it, but then in the remasters, it's totally bland and lifeless. Other notable typos are this deli that sells Depresso and Sop, a music shop with AR guitars, and a clothing store that sells cloths for all. And then of course there's the mission coronas being blindingly bright, weird skeletal bugs, San Andreas menu effects across all games, and plenty of visual glitches from the originals that were never fixed. Some of the issues have been somewhat resolved, like the god-awful rain found in all three, and the invisible bridge in San Andreas, but I think I've droned on about the visuals for long enough. So let's step back and take a look at the gameplay changes that have been implemented.
Since you've been away, shit has changed around here.
Something that certainly hasn't aged well with this trio of Grand Theft Auto games is its gameplay. When compared to the modern amenities implemented in GTA 4 and 5, playing this trilogy can almost feel like time traveling back to the Stone Age. Grove Street Games did attempt to modernize the archaic gameplay, and it doesn't go unappreciated, even if it does sometimes fall short. One of the biggest changes you'll notice is the switch to a controller layout that mimics Grand Theft Auto 5's. Things like braking and accelerating in vehicles have been switched from the face buttons to the triggers, which has become a standard in almost all games. It feels so much more natural to drive this way, although it is a bit odd that, apart from a couple presets, you can't remap the buttons to your liking. Combat is also now mapped to the right trigger, as you would expect, with aiming mapped to the left one. You'll notice that targeting an enemy is now significantly smoother in all three games, utilizing a system similar to that of newer Rockstar titles. It's such an improvement over the clunky aiming of the originals, especially 3 and Vice City, but it just feels off when compared to even GTA 4. The reticle moves from target to target very sluggishly, and in general just lacks that snappy and fluid feel of Red Dead Redemption 2 or GTA 5. Plus, there's no way to free aim like you could in those games by just holding the trigger in halfway. This led to a lot of occasions where I would try to shoot at a vehicle, and it would auto-lock to the nearest pedestrian. There's also a very weird white outline around whoever you're aiming at, something that would have been nice to see a toggle for, as I'm not particularly fond of it. Still, it is a much needed improvement over the originals, even though it could still use some tweaking. The weapon wheel has also been retroactively fitted to the classic trilogy and is warmly welcomed. It's not a game changer or anything, but being able to slow time and pick the exact weapon you want is a great enhancement over cycling through your entire arsenal just to find a specific one. The radio also receives the same treatment and offers similar benefits of more easily selecting a station. For whatever reason, though, it provides no indication on what station you're currently on, nor does it provide the name of the song. What's peculiar with GTA 3's radio wheel is that they use the Liberty City Stories radio icons, which isn't a huge deal, but it's just kind of a weird continuity error when the DJ is telling you you're on, yet the icon says MSX98. Speaking of the music, it's great that a majority of the tracks are still present, but glaring omissions like Billie Jean and Killing in the Name are so essential to their respective games that it almost feels criminal for them to be left out. Take-Two is one of the largest media companies in the world. Was there really no way for them to resecure the licensing for these missing tracks, or were they just being cheap? If you're curious of which songs were left out, it's actually identical to the 10th anniversary mobile ports of these games, which reaffirms a suspicion I have. I am almost 100% sure these definitive editions are based off the mobile ports. Gameplay bugs and changes that were not present in the originals, but wound up in the mobile versions, all make their return, but are most obvious in San Andreas. I noticed this when I went to the gym in Los Santos for the first time and lifted weights. In the original, this minigame has you alternating buttons on the controller to build more muscle, and as you do, it gets easier. Instead, in the remaster, it is clearly based off the touchscreen controls, which is further proved by the fact that you can lift the heaviest weights in the gym right from the get-go, an issue only introduced with the mobile port. Further proof of this is how the punching bags lack any physics, how radio stations sometimes skip, or how CJ abruptly stops at the surface of water and doesn't sink after a long fall. A new bug that actually didn't come from the mobile ports is a weird, roughly 1 second delay you get before sprinting. Instead of just holding the sprint button, the game requires you to tap it repeatedly, which wouldn't be so bad except that when you start pressing the button, there's about a whole second delay from the first press to when you actually start sprinting. Thankfully, I found there is a way to go back to the original hold to sprint in the options menu, but it wasn't before I found myself trying to flee from a burning vehicle only to not make it in time. And that, of course, led me to finding yet another oddity with this remaster. For whatever reason, the time frame from when a car ignites to when it explodes is tied directly to frame rate. So the higher the frame rate, the shorter opportunity you have to escape the imminent explosion. That being said, it's not all bad. Another great addition is the introduction of a waypoint system. No longer will you find yourself driving to the edge of the water trying to reach your target, only to realize you were on the wrong island the whole time. I also love that it functions similarly to GTA 5's minimap, so you can push down on the D-pad to zoom out and get a bigger view of the surrounding area. Another plus is you can now retry missions immediately after failing them, and even though they're not full checkpoint systems, it still beats driving all the way from the hospital to the mission start. Like I said, there are some really good changes here, but they all feel more like just meeting the bare minimum, and the implementation of even more quality of life improvements would have gone a long way. Even though GTA 3 is one of my all-time favorites, it's undeniable that it is showing its age, and it, as well as Vice City, could have really benefited from the implementation of some of San Andreas' more refined gameplay. Allowing Claude and Tommy Vercetti to swim, crouch, and climb like CJ would have greatly improved the two's archaic gameplay. Hell, Claude can't even dive out of moving vehicles, which leads to its own headaches. Obviously, this wouldn't be for everyone's taste, but why not allow you to toggle these on and off in the settings? Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 did this expertly by introducing all kinds of new tricks that were not present in the originals, while also letting you turn them off if you wanted to get that truly classic experience. What is one of the most baffling parts of this whole release, though, is just how incredibly poor the performance is. I get that Unreal can be a taxing engine for any machine, but I don't think it's too much for anyone to ask that a set of almost 20-year-old games run buttery smooth on any console. Instead, the frame rate and frame pacing are simply pathetic, especially if you play on the Switch. Now, it certainly didn't make the games unplayable, but the trio's performance is not something I ever expected I would have to critique, considering their age. Thankfully, the gameplay enhancements to this trilogy are much easier to digest than the bizarre choices made with the visuals. But overall, it's not even close to a quality experience. Sure, there is still a load of fun to be had with these three games, but none of that stems from any of the changes this remaster brings, and instead comes from the merits of the original trilogy's design.
Same things make us laugh, make us cry.
I'm sure it sounds like I'm just nitpicking here, but Grand Theft Auto The Trilogy Definitive Edition suffers from what is truly death by a thousand cuts. Every detail, no matter how minute, from the boring fonts on textures to the lack of fog and atmosphere, collectively contribute to a release that feels undeniably half-baked. When a slew of new bugs are introduced on top of the old ones, fan-favorite radio songs are omitted, and the original artistic vision is lost, you're left with a final product that is both lackluster and objectively not definitive. What should have been a celebration of what laid the foundation for modern GTA games has amounted to a collection of downgraded experiences that find themselves to be disappointing more often than they are exciting. For every positive takeaway these remasters earn, there's an equal, if not double, amount of damning negatives that not only sours the joy of re-experiencing these three timeless classics, but tarnishes the long-established legacy of some of the most important titles in not just Rockstar's catalog, but all of gaming. Considering the state of these so-called definitive editions, $60 seems like a pretty steep price. If they weren't released as such a broken and disappointing mess, I probably wouldn't be able to contain my praises. But instead, all these games succeed at doing is insulting a fan base that clearly cares more about this trio of games than Rockstar themselves. But hey, these are just my opinions. What do you guys think? Are these worth the $60 price tag, or are they asking a little bit too much? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this review, please give me a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. If you want to hear more of my mild gaming takes, hit me up on Instagram or Twitter. And with that, I've been TheNamesJER. Thanks for watching. See you later!